At over 100 years old, this estate is known for its gardens. It is both a California historical landmark and listed on the National Register of Historical Places. Located 30 miles south of San Francisco in the foothills of the San Francisco Peninsula and just 2 miles from the San Andreas Fault, this estate has been used in numerous films, including Heaven Can Wait in 1978, The Game in 1997. Also used during the opening credits of the TV series Dynasty from 1981 to 89. Named after the first letters of Fight, Love, and Live. This is Geo Divulge. Welcome to the Filoli Estate. This is the main house of the Filoli Estate, built between 1915 and 1917. We'll be going in there a little bit later, but for now we're going to take a look at the gardens. 16 acres of gardens, and the full estate is 654 acres. Construction of the gardens began immediately after completion of the main house in 1917. Actually, the vision of the gardens began years earlier while the house was being planned. The original owners, William Bower Bourne II and his wife Agnes Moody Bourne, envisioned an estate with gardens. The gardens were built as a group of enclosed areas, bordered by hedges and walls with openings to allow easy access from one area to the other. There are numerous species of plants and flowers found throughout the 16 acres. The design is Anglo-American and Italian style that became popular in the 20th century in America. Near the house, the sunken section of the garden houses a rectangular pool that contains water lilies and surrounded by lawns and 2 olive trees and clipped Japanese urine. Numerous potted plants decorate this area. Since construction began, the work on the gardens have never stopped. Today, hundreds of volunteers work to keep the gardens healthy and fresh. Mr. and Mrs. Bourne owned and lived in the house until their deaths in 1936. The estate was then sold to William P. Roth and his wife Lorraine Matson Ross, heirs to the Matson Navigation Company. During their time in the house, they added different species of plants and flowers, as well as the main swimming pool and screened tea house. In 1975, Mrs. Roth attempted to sell the estate, but had difficulty selling it with the stipulation that the gardens would remain public access. Since she insisted that such an access would not be lost by the new owners, Mrs. Roth instead donated the entire estate to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Today, the house and gardens are open to the public in the spring and summer. In a few minutes, we will move to the main house here at Filoli. Today's tour will be conducted by Tucker, who I was told by the staff at the front entry desk is the best tour guide here. However, through further conversations with a number of Filoli staff, it appears that all the tour guides here are the best. I have noticed that people working here all seem to be very knowledgeable, professional, considerate, cultured, and a great addition to such a historic place. When visiting here, one should act respectful to such a historic and special place. The main house of Filoli is one of the finest representations of Georgian Revival tradition style. It is 54,256 square feet, 56 rooms, 10 family bedrooms, 14 staff bedrooms, 16 bathrooms, 3 libraries, 2 kitchens, and 17 fireplaces. Most of the interior rooms are 17 feet high. The reception room has an 18-foot, 6-inch ceiling. Before construction, it is said that Mr. William Bourne, the first owner, said in 1912, quote, "My idea is to devote the afterglow of my life, this is the next 40 or 50 years or so, in personal supervision and its development. There I hope to grow young," end quote. Today's tour of the house will start just outside the front door.
About what's upstairs. So upstairs there are 10 main family bedrooms. So the main family was living on the 2nd floor, and during the Roth era, the second family that lived here, they had 3 teenage children. And when the children grew up, Mrs. Roth had a tradition where she required the family that still lived locally, the children and then the grandchildren, to come and stay twice a night, come for dinner and then stay the night and leave in the morning. So the bedrooms were used quite a bit. In the earlier period, the Bourne family, there was only 2 people living here full time, Mr. and Mrs. Bourne, who both had their own master suites. But they did have one daughter, Maud, who lived at an estate in Ireland that they bought for her. It was called Muckross. And so she lived abroad, but she would come with her family. She had 2 children, and visit for long periods, sometimes for months at a time, basically in the summer mostly. After she tragically died, before the parents did, her son Billy and daughter, but especially Billy, came here for long periods. He would come off and on for year periods and live at Filoli. And that brings us into our tradition, or into a transition of talking to about our first staff member here. So when Billy was a young boy and he would come to visit here, we were getting into the early 1930s. There was a rash of child kidnappings that were happening of elite children, and there were 2, if you think about the Lindbergh baby, that was in the exact same time period. Huge disparity in wealth going on at that time in the United States, but there were 2 attempts on the kidnapping of Billy when he was a young boy. So the Bournes decided to hire a bodyguard for him, a full-time bodyguard. This was a few years before the Lindbergh baby happened. And so this brings us to our first staff member. So this man right here is named Ray Buttermore. So Ray Buttermore worked for the Spring Valley Water Company, which Mr. Bourne owned and operated, and it was actually, if you go 2 miles north of here, you see the big reservoir there. So he operated and owned that, and that was mainly the reason why they built this house here. So Ray was hired from the company to come here and be the full-time bodyguard when Billy was here. He was famous for carrying around this Colt 45, which you can see he's holding here. And Billy had many sort of funny memories of Ray growing up. One of them was that he taught Billy, when he was a young man, how to shoot the Colt 45, and he also taught him how to drive out on Cañada Road. Now, from here, we're going to head into the ballroom. We're bringing them in here. And this whole side of the house is kind of like the entertainment zone, the north wing of this Georgian home, which is in a U shape. So in this room, we talk about Ernest Peixoto. Ernest Peixoto was born in the 1860s in San Francisco to a Sephardic Jewish family. And Ernest Peixoto was actually the artist that painted these paintings on the wall. So the paintings, as I said, are of Muckross, the estate that they bought for their daughter in Ireland on her wedding day as a surprise. So here's the estate. It was essentially a large castle, Victorian in style. Ernest Peixoto was from San Francisco. He was a friend of Mr. Bourne. They were both on the same gentlemen's club, the Bohemian Club, and knew each other quite closely. Ernest Peixoto immigrated from the United States, he was an American citizen, to France actually in the 1880s. And he moved there to be closer to the French impressionistic painters that he was so influenced by. And he bought a house there in Fontainebleau outside of Paris, and he lived between there and New York, so he kind of bounced back and forth throughout his career. He had a studio in New York City, and he also was an illustrator, and he worked for Scribner's and Harper's, and so very successful illustration, doing very successfully in the illustration business during the Gilded Age of illustration. A lot of images of the first family that built the house. So William Bowers Bourne Jr., this is his portrait over here, and then his wife Agnes, and this was the age that they were when they built the house. So they built the house between 1915 and 1917. William Bowers Bourne was a prominent capitalist from his time. He was involved in many different businesses, like his father had. He was born in San Francisco during the gold rush. His father was involved in shipping goods, especially back to the gold and silver countries, which is really where they made a lot of their money. And then when his father died, he inherited a gold mine in Grass Valley called the Empire Gold Mine, a source of his money early on in his life. And then he was also involved in Spring Valley Water Company, which I mentioned before, as well as Madroño, which was the vineyard that the family owned up in St. Helena, and Greystone Cellars up there as well. Many different agricultural pursuits. The San Francisco Gas Company, as well as, there's many. Here, you're going to notice a little bit different. We just redid these this year. It's linseed linoleum. We brought them back to the Bourne era. We found a piece of the original flooring and brought them back to the earlier era. But again, it is kind of a smorgasbord of eras in here. I want to introduce you to Alma, another picture taken by Billy. Alma was the cook here during the Bourne era. And Alma was Swedish, so she came over to work for the Bournes. She was famous for her cookies, her sweets, her homemade coffee ice cream. And we have some stories from the daughter of one of the chauffeurs that grew up here. I'll actually walk you over to the side. So you're... So the Butler's Pantry, you're going to see a lot of additions from the 1950s when they had a renovation here. So these GE kitchens, they've got two. There's one here, you're going to see another one when we get to the pastry kitchen. And so the kitchens show the most amount of change over time as different appliances we updated, they're adding them. But it's kind of funny, you just get to see the different eras of it. So you were asking how they communicated in the house. Here you see a panel on the wall that was used for communication in the house. So there's buzzers in almost every single room, downstairs by the fireplaces, but also upstairs, even in the bathrooms, above the bathtubs, even one that goes all the way up to the garden house. And so you can call up the call board, and this would light up and make a sound. And the Butler's Pantry is the area where all of the tasks are delineated. It's like ground zero for the domestic staff. And so the butler would be able to get a lot of information from here. Maybe, breakfast is supposed to be at a certain time, but then they buzz in, you go to the room, they tell them it's going to be another time, just to come back here and sort of reorganize everything. This room was used for food presentation, food preparation. So everything would be cooked in the kitchen, which is the next room over, and then brought into here on this big table. You were doing all of the plating, and then goes out straight into the dining room from there, behind the screen.
So I hope you enjoyed your visit to this historical place, a look back at the rich and famous in the earlier 20th century. I bet there's some special places near where you live. Just look around and always be in the now. There are millions of people that live and work in the San Francisco Bay Area that are completely unaware of this sort of place. And it's just 5 or 10 minute drive from Silicon Valley. So, until next time, be in the now and keep living the dream.